Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'm Karen McCarthy. On the program this week, the lowdown on dairying. Are the days of the dairy boom numbered? A recent bank report suggests a slowdown in milk production is inevitable over the next decade, with dire warnings. New Zealand dairy farmers stand to save hundreds of millions of dollars a year from research with other countries on cow fertility. We ask, is there a silver bullet to reproduction problems? And when cows go bad, with a growing catalogue of serious injuries, a warning for farmers to take extra care around skittish, moody cows, hormonal beasts capable of doing quite some damage during the calving season. In the studio with me this week from the Dairy Women's Network, Chief Executive Sarah Speight, and the man at the top at Dairy NZ, Tim Mackle. Thanks to both of you for being here with us. Let's look at this Rabobank report in the first instance. New challenges facing New Zealand's dairy industry are going to force a slowdown in milk production over the next decade. Is this a bad thing? Is this a cause for concern, Sarah?
I think it's probably a report we've been expecting for some time. The last 10 years in dairying has been highly exciting. We have seen quite big increases in production, new land coming into production and increasing productivity on farm. We need to be mindful now, of course, about our footprint and just need to be sure that we are still growing but sustainably. So I'm sure Tim would agree that there's no great surprises in there for us.
Is it a case, Tim, that it's been like too good for so long? That's the thing, that momentum of the last 10 years we really can't sustain?
Well, I mean, as Sarah said, it's been a good story, and as Sarah indicated, we're probably almost doubled in the last 10 years. And so that's been really positive for the industry, but also for New Zealand as a whole in terms of export. So that's been a good thing, but there's quite a few things going on. It's probably a fair assessment that further production growth at the rate we've seen is going to be challenged. And there are a few things going on. You've got the issue of finance and bank lending and so on, and not so much that there's not money available now to lend, but also that the rules have tightened up a bit, and debt to equity ratios are a challenge for some farmers. So you'll see farmers taking a more conservative approach. I mean,
there has been easy access to credit, hasn't there, giving farmers that capital to expand, and that would have fuelled the boom
Certainly.
times.
Pre-recession, there was a lot more access, and there are now a number of farmers who are in possibly 15–20% are experiencing high farm working expenses and high interest costs, and that combination together means that often they end up making a profit loss when you're seeing milk price forecasts where they're at. So that's definitely an issue. Then you've got the regulatory issues that Sarah touched on as well, and we're entering a phase now where we're going to be more challenged in that respect. So there are some things going on. Then you've got constraints around land availability and that sort of thing. But putting that all aside, the fundamental demand for dairy is still tremendous going forward. So, and farmers are entrepreneurs at heart. So at the end of the day, it's quite difficult to predict. Yes, there's more challenge ahead in terms of that sort of growth, but at the same time, there's a lot of appetite to keep dairy moving forward.
Yes, there's a lot of opportunities still, isn't there, and a lot of upside in terms of international demand. Right. We've just got to balance that with ensuring that we've still got a productive industry in 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time.
Whatever we do, we have to make sure that it is going to be competitive vis-a-vis our other competitors overseas, and we have to make sure that it can also help us deal with the footprint issues that we talked about earlier. The fact that with that growth of milk production has come scale, and with that we also know there's been a bigger footprint. And we now need to manage that much better going forward, working with the community and with the government to do that. So, systems will play a role in that, the type of systems farmers do use.
Let's talk about some of the constraints that you mentioned, the tightening of environmental regulations and that aspect, attention falling on issues like the effluent treatment and disposal. That is a big factor, isn't it, in terms of costs, compliance?
Oh, it's huge, and it is something we do need to be mindful of, that water quality is a huge issue. We want to maintain New Zealand's reputation as having a good water quality. Having worked in countries overseas where that's not the case, it's very, very important.
There's been a big decision just recently, hasn't there? You mentioned a Horizon appeal.
There has, yeah. The appeal to the Environment Court just this week actually was overturned in terms of the Horizons plan, the One Plan.
Just tell us about that in brief.
Well, there are roughly, I think there's actually 428 dairy farms involved in the catchment that we're talking about, and they are subject to rules under the Horizon 1 plan, and there is a lot of the rules are around, but the first thing is they need to get a consent to operate, to farm, and there are some limits around that, and nitrogen is the primary measure, if you like, of focus, and I think there's a stepped sort of process 1, 5 and 20 years down where the actual nitrogen leaching has to step down. Now, the dairy industry itself is not opposed to trying to fix issues around environmental sustainability. In fact, we want to be part of the solution. We want to be part of that. And most farmers, the majority of them, are on this page right now, and they want to be part of it.
We've talked about that in the past. Farmers, for the most part, are responsible citizens.
But it's about really firstly identifying what we want from water bodies around the country. What are the values of the community? Is it drinkability? Is it swimmability? And then what actually helps support that? So what are the contaminants or the nutrients or that actually cause issues? So it's not always nitrogen. Could be phosphorus. Could be coliform, for example, or even from municipal waste. It's not always from farm by any stretch of the imagination. So it's really about working out what we want first, what it takes to achieve that, then what the solutions are that you can put in place on farms and in other areas as well that contribute to the water quality, and then getting agreement. And we accept that there may be some regulation that will be involved here, but we just want it to be on the right things that fix the problems, at the same time that they're economic and practical, because we can't kneecap ourselves here. We have to actually put in place things that work but that are affordable for the country.
If we are unable to keep pace with growing demand for milk, are importers who rely on our dairy products likely to look elsewhere? Is there that kind of spectre looming that if they can't get what they need from New Zealand, they are going to look, I don't know where, South America or elsewhere in future?
Oh, I think that's a given, and certainly if you look at Fonterra's strategy, they're very mindful of that and are certainly looking at how they can grow their supply base outside New Zealand. We're very small, and all this rhetoric about New Zealand feeding the world, to me, is ridiculous. If you look at the size of New Zealand and our capacity to produce compared to the demand for the whole world, it's just rhetoric. It's crazy. So, Fonterra, I think, is taking a very sensible and rational approach. Where else can we pick up supply in a cost-effective manner? And they are actively building that supply base.
More on that after the break. Also coming up, danger in the paddock. A number of farmers have come to grief recently with hormonal beasts behaving badly during calving season. What to do, how to spot when a cow is on maternal overdrive. Stay with us on Straight Talk. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'm Karen McCarthy. We're back talking dairying with Tim Mackle and Sarah Speight. Let's pick up on Fonterra, you mentioned just before the break. Has been getting across borders, looking at sourcing more milk from other parts of the world. You were saying that it's got to go there. We're too small to sustain demand in New Zealand alone.
Absolutely, Karen. And as I say, I think Fonterra have done the very sensible thing to say where else around the world can we source milk at a competitive price, produce it to our standards, and then put it into our markets as Fonterra branded milk, but not necessarily produced in New Zealand. I think we, as a country, should be quite relieved at this, because it does take the pressure off, going back to our discussion before about having to intensify in order to achieve the volumes needed for Fonterra to remain the leading player in the world market.
There has been talk, Tim, hasn't there, recently about us looking to farm overseas, and I'm thinking of South America again, because, there is only so much land here, isn't there?
Yeah, there is, and certainly lots of Kiwi farmers are doing that right now. There's a number of them that are branching out, and Sarah's right, it's a smart strategy, because if demand is truly growing at the rate of, say, the size of New Zealand dairy industry every year, then the logic would suggest that our position on the exports can't keep up with that necessarily. So the smart thing to do is to go and be part of the action overseas, and Fonterra, for one, is doing that very well at the moment. So New Zealanders will benefit from that. So any growth that happens overseas, we probably need to be there as well. Where
is the action happening overseas? I mean, we hear about one or two places, and I know you've farmed yourself, dairy farmed overseas, haven't you?
Yeah, China, obviously, South America, and the next big thing, I believe, will be India.
India?
There's 1.1 billion people in India. As they get more wealthy, just like the Chinese, they're looking for more and more protein. Dairy has always formed part of the diet in that part of the world, and it's probably a natural place where we can increase production relatively cheaply.
Now, before you took your role up at Dairy Women's Network, you were in Pakistan, is that right?
Yes,
I seem to
correct.
recall. And so you've seen firsthand, that's the thing, you've seen the potential.
Absolutely, and there is huge potential. Quite different systems to what we employ in New Zealand, but there will be a demand for pure milk. There's still a lot of issues with the informal milk supply in that part of the world, where milk is adulterated quite a lot, and makes the Sanlu melamine issue look tiny. So to have a good, clean, pure milk source coming out of that part of the world, I think could be very profitable long term.
What challenges are there trying to take our farming systems, or what we know, to a third world country though? As I say,
we actually can't. We actually can't. We can take our know-how around processing, and that's really important. But in terms of the actual farm systems, if you go into an environment that's very arid and has totally different supply chain issues, then we need. I think the great thing about Kiwis is we are able to innovate and are able to look at putting a system together that's going to work in whatever environment.
And Tim, where does the investment come for something like this? Do they have to be joint ventures, I suppose? Yeah,
typically people are pooling money together. Often the good stories you hear about too are where farmers here are getting together in consortia, if you like. So that's a good positive thing, and we're looking to repatriate profits back to New Zealand. So it's all positive in that respect. But you're right about, even in first world countries, it's not easy, and every country is different, and you can't just take a New Zealand system and assume that you're going to be able to run it just like it does back here. There are always little nuances with weather, and most importantly with people, and that's probably the biggest factor that people are finding overseas is making sure, and Sarah had experience obviously in Chile and Pakistan, having the right people to actually operate the systems optimally is a big challenge. And
so they're keen, but they don't always know what they're doing.
Well, it's often the resource base is very different. I mean, the part of Chile I was farming in is very similar, so there's a lot of New Zealand input that can go in. But if you are looking at it, as I say, a system that's tropical or arid, very, very different. And often the people too, if you look at who are milking the cows in countries like Pakistan and Chile, they're generally illiterate or have very, very low levels of schooling. So you need to be mindful of what kind of technology they are able to employ, which is quite different to the skill level we have in our dairy industry here in New Zealand.
Let's talk just for a moment about we're in the midst of calving season, about badly behaving beasts, as I say. You were having a chuckle before, but we've seen some pretty serious incidents in recent weeks up and down the country.
Oh, it's pretty typical for this time of the year. It'll get worse as we start bringing bulls onto farms, because bulls bring a whole new dynamic into dairy farms anyway. Most of the incidents we're hearing about around beef stock. Obviously, cows are animals. If they've got a calf at foot, they're going to be very protective, and it's really important, I think, particularly with people who are new to handling stock, that they understand the dynamics between a mother and her calf, and it's quite important, as with any wild animal, not to get between the two.
That's right.
And I think if people just have used some common sense around that and around how they approach stock who've got newborn animals, then there doesn't seem to be too many problems.
Is it easy to forget when the pressure's on? I mean, I guess it's a very stressful time of year calving, isn't it? People are out there 24/7.
I think it's more that people get tired, Karen. You have people that perhaps aren't getting as much sleep as is optimal, perhaps not eating as well as they should, and the old brain does slow down a bit for sure.
That's right. I mean, any time you're working with large animals, you've always got to be on your wits. Middle of the summer when the bulls are out, we had a person that was pinned down under a gate by a bull, came straight through the cows, tired, grumpy, probably wasn't seeing a lot of action. So, that you always got to watch out. But I can remember growing up, you typically, and now probably in those days our herd was smaller, maybe 300 cows or so, but you always knew which cows you had to watch out for in the spring. And I can remember number 27, she was an absolute beast, and so she chased me into the corner when I tried to take her calf one day. So you just got to know which cows as well are going to get titchy, and they often do every year.
And how do you get out of a situation like that? That's the thing, when you see you're in trouble, What do you do?
Run fast.
Yeah, so hope you get your running shoes on, your running boots on.
Because it'd be quite daunting. I mean, I don't know, what does a typical cow weigh?
450, 500 kilos.
Right, okay.
So half a tonne coming at you is a bit of a scary proposition, isn't it?
Is it unusual, as I say, it just seems to have been in the headlines in the last couple of weeks. There was incidents in Bay of Plenty down the line, Waiheke just this week as well, with people being injured. That Speight, is it common, or is it unusual that we should be hearing about this?
Oh, I don't think it's unusual. There seems to be a lot more attention in the media this year. Maybe it's a slow news month, I don't know. But as Tim says, anywhere where you've got stock, you do have to be mindful that farming at times can be a dangerous profession. It's a bit like working in forestry. You've got to watch for falling trees. Well, in dairying, in any form of stock, you've got to be watching out for animals.
And a bizarre story, the one from Waiheke, they said that a chap had been bitten by his cows. But
sounds a bit bizarre.
Yeah, that would be a first, would it?
Yeah.
Well, I thought they were herbivores actually, but
Exactly. I've never heard of cows biting before. Have you, Tim?
horses, but not cows. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I think that turns out a bit of misinformation there. But anyway, farmers, take care out there. More from our guests after the break, including the case of the mutant calves. Livestock Improvement is to refund farmers caught up in the matrix mutation. But is that enough for the losses faced by those affected? Stay with us for more Straight Talk. Hello, you're back with Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow, and our guests in the studio this week, Sarah Speight and Tim Mackle. Let's talk about the hairy calves. I mean, it's something that has been in the headlines, and a decision this week by the genetics company Livestock Improvement to credit the cost of all semen and inseminations from this bull call matrix. Just fill us in for those that may not be across what's happened.
Oh, basically there's been a line of offspring from this bull that has a very hairy coat, which means that they suffer quite badly from heat stress, which means that they tend to behave in a way that means they're probably not going to produce a lot of milk. They tend to like jumping in troughs, hiding in bush lines, whatever, just to get away from the heat. Which means that the conversion efficiency of feed into milk when cows are suffering from heat stress is not flash.
Is mutant calves going a bit far, or is that exactly what we're talking about here?
It is a genetic mutation. So I think mutant calves makes it sound like it's something out of Alien or whatever, but no.
There's something wrong with these animals.
Yes, there is.
And there's no future for them, that's the thing.
That's correct, yeah.
Has Livestock Improvement done the right thing then? There have been a number of meetings behind closed doors, I think, and out of the media spotlight, farmers demanding compensation. As I say, this decision just in the last few days to come to the party in some respect. Is it enough?
Yeah, it's an interesting question actually, Karen, because LIC is a cooperative, whereas if you have another genetics company like CRV, for example, who are a company, some of the decision making could be quite different. And I think that the decision by LIC is reflective of the cooperative nature of the business, where it's believed that all farmers share the risk of something like this happening. And so from that point of view, I think it's been very well received by LIC shareholders.
Do you think the farmers are getting a raw deal or a fair deal here from Livestock, Tim?
Well, it's difficult for me to say, and that I don't know all the details of where the latest decisions have got to, Karen, but it's, I can see both sides of the argument. Whenever you've got genetics and breeding involved, there's always a chance of these things occurring. It doesn't matter what population you're talking about. But at the same time, as Sarah said, the cooperative nature of that organisation means that perhaps there's an expectation there that you actually remedy these situations. But then you also got to ask the question, well, where might that stop? So, and I guess cooperative members have got to consider that as well. At what point do you actually say, well, actually that's just part of the rest of business of what we're in, and we need to get on with things. So, it's a difficult one to manage, I'm sure.
This decision maybe risks opening the floodgates, possibly.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that will be a concern for LIC. But as a board, I'm sure they'll set some guidelines around where they think those lines should be drawn.
I'm sure they've thought long and hard before coming to this conclusion.
Oh, I'm sure they did. They've got a very good board. and they've got a couple of new people in there that will add a lot of value to that. And I'm sure they've made the decision based on principles and facts. And as I say, certainly the shareholders I know that I've spoken to that have been affected are very pleased with the outcome.
And the thing is, as we now know, they say it's a naturally occurring mutation. So how is it anybody should be held responsible? Is this a wake-up call at all for the industry? I know there's farmers down Nelson Way, I think, have said this is a wake-up call and shows the risks where farmers are being used as guinea pigs. Is that a little extreme, or do you think there is that measure of concern out there?
I suspect that might be related to, that comment could be related to perhaps genomics, I'm not sure, but I think what it really does highlight is also the central role that breeding plays in our industry. And, you know, our industry, a good part of the reason why we have been successful is because we've had a really good genetics and breeding industry. And that's really helped us get to where we are. And we can't take our eye off that ball, and we have to keep focusing on doing that better all the time. So I think really, for me, it just highlights how important this is to farmers and how critical it is for farmers to do the whole fertility and reproduction thing well, get good calves on the ground and get into the next season. It's a really important aspect, and any little bump or disturbance to that is a problem for farmers.
Just talking about science and breeding, you're back fairly recently from a big conference in the States on cow fertility. Tell us a little about that and what you came away with.
Yeah, look, American Dairy Science Association conference, and it's a big annual thing every year, and you get people from all over the world coming in. So it was a good thing for me to go to really understand what was being done there in the field of well, fertility for cows, and there's a whole bunch of other things around production and so on. But certainly there were some, I guess, good takeaways there for us. And interestingly, science funding globally and capability to do the work has been lagging. And I think that, you know, particularly in the US, you see that these great universities that have always been great are struggling a bit now because it's hard to find capability, it's hard to find funding to fund them. And they probably need a bit of reform, frankly, in terms of working together more. It's quite hard because they're very parochial. I did my PhD actually at one of them myself, so I understand the system. So that's one aspect. The other one is that we have a really good system here in New Zealand where farmers are part of the scene. They own industry good organisations like Dairy NZ. They drive and own Dairy Women's Network, those sort of organisations, cooperatives that we have, dairy companies. And so they are a big part of the strategy for their own industry. And that strategy that we do have then flows down and cascades to all the different organisations. And generally our scientists are very well focused on what they have to do to contribute to the big picture. They know how their work fits in to the strategic goals of the industry. And I would say that other countries, particularly the US, aren't in that privileged position that we're in. So it's a really good feature I think we have. We have people that know why they come into work and what they're trying to achieve for the dairy farm, which is a good thing. And fertility is a big one.
And we're up for being at that top table, as you say, when it comes to kind of being a big hitter on the world stage in this area.
Yeah, we are. But, you know, one of the issues that we have to grapple with is the capability thing. Have we got enough people to solve the problems? So if you take fertility issues, we are still not there by any stretch. And, you know, we've got an industry target of having all cows on all farms, on average, 78% in calf rate by 6 weeks. Now, we're probably languishing at the moment in the low 60s to mid 60s. So there's a fair way to go. And it's so important because besides the production aspect and the economic contribution, matching, you know, cows calving with feed supply and the pasture growth curve, all that kind of thing, you've also got other issues around the amount of stock that you have to carry, the replacements. That has not only economic impacts but environmental ones as well, carrying less stock, greenhouse gas, nitrogen, phosphorus, whatever. So there's a real efficiency drive there, and fertility is one of the key drivers. And as an industry we need to do better, but it's not just about research. There's an on-farm adoption challenge, there's a people challenge in terms of monitoring matings and so on, and there is definitely a research challenge, and that's the thing that we talked about in the US. Many of the cows that are inseminated, actually, their eggs are fertilised. In fact, I've been told it's something like 90% of inseminations result in an actual successful fertilisation of the egg, something then happens after that in the next couple of weeks, which means a lot of them end up dying. And we understand the immune response and the cows involved. There's some other factors there as well. And so it's quite important now that we get to the bottom of it. And I would suggest, and what we are doing, is trying to team up with scientists around the world, particularly in the US, to try and have a multi-team approach to solving the issue.
You've been watching Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Thank you to my guest, Sarah Speight from the Dairy Women's Network, and to Tim Mackle from Dairy NZ. And as always, to you at home for watching. If you'd like to get in touch, check out our website at country99tv.co.nz. It's always good to hear from you. I'm Karen McCarthy, back next time with more Straight Talk.